Hello and good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on ACC asset management, a three credit model. My name is Matthew Smith, and I'll be presenting this webinar. So, what I would ask is if anybody does have any questions, could please put the questions into the Q&A box or into the chat section. The agenda for this webinar is that we'll just do a little introductory slide about Greatech, whereupon then we will be looking at the asset management process within ACC using our 3D credit models. Okay. Hopefully that improves the sound for you. That has improved the sound quality for you. If you just continue problem, please mention again. So I'll start with say a bit about myself. My name is Matthew Smith. I'm a technical consultant at Greatech. I am a chartered architectural technologist with over 10 years of industry experience working for a number of architectural and structural engineering practices. And my focus here at Greatech is helping customers with ISO 19650 adoption and Autodesk Construction Cloud and Common Data Environment implementation. Bit of personal information about myself. I am a very big cricket fan, of which I both love watching and playing cricket. So to jump in now to the webinar on our asset mapping, I'm actually going to start with looking at our Revit model, because this is where essentially we are starting with this. So just let me share my screen. Right, there we go. Okay, so here you can see, look, I'm in my Revit model at the minute, and if I just come to a 3D view, this is just a generic standard Revit model data set. And obviously the way that we work within Revit is that we put a lot of the information about our building elements or our assets within the Revit parameters. So for example, if I select this Eurobond wall here, then here we can see we have data parameters based around Kobe, the area and volume, and if I come into the type properties, you can see that I have put some basic construction information here about these elements. And regardless of our discipline, this is what we will be doing, whether we're structural, MEP, or architectural. We will be selecting our Revit elements, and we will be applying the metadata that we need. From there, we are obviously then producing our own schedules within Revit to list out, almost create potentially our own asset register within here. Well, what we're going to look at, or what I want to look at now, is within the ACC environment, we're going to look at the asset register that we can build or we can create within ACC build. So here I am within Greatex Autodesk Construction Cloud, and I'm just going to navigate to a project that has my asset register. Now, if you have seen my previous video or my previous webinar, that previous one was me setting up the categories and setting up essentially the background behind the asset register. And so here I am within my asset register. Look, you can see that I have created these categories here. From there, we can see that I have already mapped certain information from my Revit model into my main asset register that I create here. Now, in my previous webinar, I talked about how we can import assets via an Excel schedule, or we can create an individual asset. From the settings over here we can create our status sets, which is these statuses that we can work through as we are going through and breaking down and going through the sort of categories to say, okay, well, this item has been delivered, this item has been fabricated, there's been a commission test done on this asset. Well, from there, we have then looked at creating various sorts of areas where we can input the information, our own custom fields. Okay. And so what I'm going to do now is we want to look at mapping the data from Revit into these custom fields. Okay. Now, if I was just to quickly go through and enter an asset, so let's, if I come back to my Revit model and come back to here, look, we can use, let's say, Windows, for example. So from here, look, I can see that I've got some data based around these windows that I can then place into the asset register. Now, without the ability to map our 3D Revit model to the asset register, the only way to get this information in would essentially be a copy and paste. We can export any schedules we create within Revit using Dynamo or a third-party product. In particular, the Greytech Power Pack gives us the ability to export schedules to an Excel file. This would then allow me to copy the data from that Excel into the asset register import. If I was to do it manually, then I would obviously have to manually import the information, which can be very time consuming when we, as you can see, have a large number of elements or windows or assets that we need to do. Well, to map the 3D model, the first thing that I'm going to do is we have to do this through the settings. Now, at the minute, I have not created the category for Windows. I've got external doors, but nothing for Windows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the categories. Now, we must make sure that we do all of the status sets and the categories and the custom fields, essentially all of the setting up of our asset register before we do the mapping of the model. Okay. So I'm going to create my category and I will call this external windows. And then I'm going to assign my status set, which is my breakdown of designed, fabricated, delivered, installed, tested, and signed off. So I'll choose the Greytech status one here. Well, now here I can add any of the custom fields that I have created that I would want including within there. So I could do something like mounting type or the ironmongery, maybe even the installation date. So I'm going to add those custom fields into this category, and I have now created that here. So if I come back to my asset register, then if I just go through the manual process of doing this, look, I've got my window number. If I come into here, you can see I've got some comments and a description and specification codes and other items that I would want to put in. So I'm going to create the asset. External window. I can now place it under the category that I want. And as well, I can then link it to the locations that I have created within my ACC project. For those of us that are unaware of how to create locations, this is done in the project settings when we first initially create the project. And so I will just assign that location there. I can then do a full description around the asset. So again, if I come into my Revit model, here's my description. I can copy and paste this data in. From there, I can enter the barcode, which we could put down as the mark. Look, I've then got my mounting type. And I can put my the ironmongery that I want into there, and then obviously the installation date as well. So you can see I have now created that asset here. So now look, if I look through the status codes. Then here you can see designed, manufactured, assembly started. Okay. Well, now this time I'm going to come to the models area. And you can see, look, I already have the model mapped in. To add in, and look, you can add multiple models in as well. So if you get a separate structural model or a separate MEP model or an architectural model, then as long as those are stored within the ACC environment, then it's very easy for us to go to the relevant location to access that information. So like you can see here, I've got the model that's already mapped, but if I wanted to, then I can select the second one. I could even go to other locations and link that in. Now, it is worth noting that there are certain file types or file formats that aren't supported. Okay. So NWCs, RVTs, IFCs, these can all be mapped, but there are certain 3D model types that won't work. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to remove this model and I'm going to go through the process of adding it back in. Like if I just come to my asset register, then look, you will still notice that even though I've removed the model, all of the previous elements that existed are still there. Look, if I come to my cladding elements, my wall panels up, these are all elements that were previously mapped. And I've removed the Revit model, but they are still there. What that means is that if the Revit model gets updated and that information within the asset gets updated, then this will not refresh. I would need to relink the model. So again, I'm going to come to settings and models. I'm going to add the model, go to the location within my ACC environment, and select the Revit model at hand. Now that that is in, I can select the model that I have linked in, and I'm going to map the assets. Now, let's have a look. Oh, we can see here, look, these are the wall panels that I am going to essentially have to reconnect or relink in. But here are the external windows that I want to do now. So I'm going to map these assets now. And what we do is we define the import rules. So we are using the parameter heading that we want to search for our elements. So for example, look, I want to search for this window type. This is the import rule, or I could do it via the family. So if I simply do type, scroll down, look, we can see it's picking up all of the ones. So we've got identity data, we've got type name. And then with that, the condition is equal or contains. And so if I do 910, let's do single window, in fact. So I'm going to do contains. I'm simply just going to type single window. And then I'm going to show the results of that. We can add additional rules to filter it down even more, to essentially bring the list down so that we're not starting with a huge long list. Well, now you can see here are all of the elements that have been selected, all of my windows, and I'm now going to save that because that's my import rule. Well, now we can see, look, those 20 assets have been assigned to that category. What we are now wanting to do is map the actual property data. So it's going to import the assets now. We can see this is now loading this information. And so by doing it this way, by mapping the 3D model in rather than, say, using an asset register, it means that we're not having to export the asset data out of Revit and then feed it into ACC. So we're essentially taking a step out, and by reducing steps, it means that there's less chance for error or missed information. Again, it means that when the Revit models are updated and then re-pushed through, then all of the information is automatically updated. So again, it means that our process of using ACC as a common data environment we are adhering to, because our models are being reviewed, they are then being submitted, and then all of the asset data and registers have been created live from the model. And so now that those assets have been imported, I'm now going to edit the mappings to do the map properties. And here we select the fields from our asset register. So what field do I want to map? Well, I want the description. I don't want the status because that's already been created. I'll probably want the barcode, and then let's say the ironmongery and the latching. And then from there, I'm then going to map it to the properties or the parameters within the Revit model. So if we look at description, then I've identified description as that field. So again, come back into here, and I'm just going to simply search for this. Now, obviously, look, you'll notice that I'm doing the identity data description because there are various other description parameters, so you must make sure that you select the right sort of subheading and area. From barcode, I'm going to do the mark. Look again, identity data and mark. And then the ironmongery and latch. For this example, I might just do the type comments. There we go, to link that data in. Okay, but you can see that whatever custom field we create within the asset register, we can link to any of the parameters within the Revit model, maybe even any customized bespoke parameters that we have created, like the Kobe parameters. And so now I can save that. There we go. That has linked that information, and I will import that in. And so now you can see the speed in which we have been able to map that data. You know, I have essentially created 20 assets within my register with all of the custom fields updated with the appropriate information. Whereas if we were to do this even via the Excel import, yes, our Excel import will have a nice big asset register. It will have all of the information there, but here it's tied directly to the model, and it's very easy to add those in. Right, so there we go. Now, if I come back to my asset register and I select the external windows category, we can see that these have already been created here. I can now link here, and we can see that the data has been applied. Now, we still have the ability to manually edit it if we want to put in additional information, but obviously when this is refreshed, then that would update it in line with what is in the model. So that is one thing that we must be conscious of. And so now, to create almost a circular reference, we could export all of this out to an Excel to essentially create an asset register outside of the ACC environment. Whereupon then potentially we could use it with the import assets if we wanted to potentially update any information that may not be in the Revit model that we could have created from, let's say, a product data template that somebody could create within the ACC environment. So, for example, in this project, one thing that I have done is that I have created a form that is a product data template, which means that any subcontractors or specialist designers who will be able to provide more information about the asset, I've used a standard services engineer template to use this. So we can see that using forms within ACC, we can get more detailed specialist information that may not be in the Revit model, which then means we can use that data to add to our mapped 3D assets. So hopefully the asset register and the differing ways of mapping our models or importing the asset register, creating our own status sets and categories shows how ACC is fantastic in terms of creating an asset register. So that is it for this webinar. Hopefully you have all found it very useful. As I say, the key points to take away from this that are, firstly, we need to set up our categories, create our custom fields and status sets, essentially have our asset register built up before we model the assets. We want to clearly define what the 3D model is that we are using. Now, obviously, this would be identified within the potentially the Exchange Information Requirements document or the BIM execution plan, stating that we should be either using IFCs, NWCs, or RVTs. From there, the other key thing that we want to make sure is that we identify the key parameters where the information can be found. So, for example, we want to make sure that every discipline uses the same parameters. Because if, let's say, the structural engineer is not using the manufacturer's field or not using the description field, then any mapping that we may do, we would have to change from model to model. So again, within the BIM execution plan or the EIR document, we want to identify or create bespoke parameters to say, Mr. and Mrs. Consultant, we want you to fill the information in here. So then when we map it into our ACC, it is standardized throughout the project rather than every discipline or subcontractor having different information in different areas. And then the actual process is that, first of all, we make sure we add the model, then we import the assets via a rule, and then we map the properties. Okay. So I'd like to thank everybody for your time today, and I will ask, does anybody have any further questions? Okay. Well, if anybody does or ask for any more or want any more information around ACC, then please feel free to contact us at Greytech, either your account manager or just contact us from our website, and we are happy to set up a demonstration around the ACC and talk to you about any technical requirements that you may have. But I'd like to thank you all for your time today and enjoy the rest of your day.